The dust on Preston Ashford's boots had turned to mud from spilled milk when he realized he could not do this alone anymore. It was 1878 in Deeming, New Mexico, and his 5 children had just destroyed the 3rd breakfast that week, the youngest 2 fighting over a spoon while the oldest tried to cook eggs that looked like leather. His wife had died bringing their last child into the world 3 years ago, and every day since had been a battle between keeping the ranch running and keeping his children fed, clean, and out of trouble. The advertisement he had placed in the Santa Fe newspaper had been an act of desperation, asking for a cook to help for 1 month while he got the cattle ready for market. He expected someone old, weathered, maybe a widow who needed the money. He did not expect Grace Sullivan. She stepped off the afternoon stage with 1 worn carpetbag and a spine straighter than the railroad tracks that had not yet reached Deeming. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her green eyes assessed the dusty town with the calculation of someone who had seen harder places and survived them. She was 26, though she carried herself with the weariness of someone much older. Preston was 32, standing on the platform with his hat in his hands and his youngest daughter, 3-year-old Mary, clinging to his leg. "Mr. Ashford?" Grace asked, her voice clear and direct. "That would be me, madam," Preston said, trying to smooth down his shirt with one hand. "I appreciate you coming all this way. You offered fair wages and board. I needed both." She looked down at Mary, who was peeking out from behind Preston's leg with wide blue eyes. "Is this one of the 5? "Yes, madam. This is Mary. The others are back at the ranch. It is about an hour's ride." Grace nodded once. Then we should not waste daylight. The wagon ride out to the Ashford ranch gave Preston time to explain the situation in more detail. His oldest, Thomas, was 12 and trying his best to be the man of the house. Then came Elizabeth at 10, who had taken on more mothering duties than any child should have to carry. The twins, Sarah and Samuel, were 7 and wild as coyotes, and little Mary, who barely remembered her mother at all. Their mother, Catherine, she was good at all the things I am terrible at, Preston said, guiding the horses along the rutted road. Cooking, mending, making the house feel like a home instead of just a place we sleep. I can work cattle and fix fences and break horses, but I cannot braid hair or make a meal that does not taste like boot leather. Grace watched the landscape roll by, all scrub brush and distant mountains. You loved her very much. It was not a question, but Preston answered anyway. Every day of our marriage. Still do, I suppose, though she has been gone these 3 years. And you have managed alone all this time. Managed is a generous word. We have survived. The children have survived, but they need more than survival. The ranch house came into view as the sun started its descent toward the horizon. It was a sturdy adobe structure with a wooden addition that Preston had built when Thomas was born. Corrals stretched out to the east, filled with cattle bearing the Ashford brand. A barn stood to the west, and beyond it, the endless New Mexico sky painted everything in gold. The children tumbled out of the house when they heard the wagon. Thomas came first, tall for his age and serious-faced. Elizabeth followed, her blonde hair in a braid that was coming undone. The twins were shouting over each other, and Mary squirmed in Preston's arms to get down and join her siblings. "Everyone, this is Miss Sullivan," Preston said, setting Mary on her feet. "She is going to be cooking for us for the next month." Grace met each of their gazes in turn, memorizing faces and names as Preston introduced them. Thomas shook her hand like a man. Elizabeth studied her with cautious hope. The twins asked if she could make pie. Mary hid behind Elizabeth's skirts. The house was exactly what Grace expected. Dishes piled in the wash basin. Laundry in heaps. Dust on every surface. The children's rooms were chaos and Preston's was Spartan and lonely. But the kitchen was large with a good stove, and the pantry, though disorganized, had adequate supplies. "I will have supper ready in an hour," Grace said, rolling up her sleeves. "Mr. Ashford, perhaps you could show the children how to properly wash up before a meal." Preston blinked at her tone, somewhere between suggestion and command, then nodded. "Yes, madam. Come on, kids." Grace set to work with the efficiency of someone who had cooked in worse conditions. She found potatoes that needed only minor salvaging, salt pork that was still good, onions, and a can of tomatoes. Within the hour, she had produced a stew that filled the house with smells that made the children gather around the kitchen door like moths to lamplight. They sat down to dinner together, all 7 of them crowded around the table, and Grace watched as Preston and his children ate like they had never tasted real food before. Thomas had 3 helpings. Even shy little Mary cleaned her plate and asked for more. "Miss Sullivan, this is the best thing I have eaten in years," Preston said, and there was something in his voice that made Grace look away, focusing on cutting up more bread. "It is just stew," she said. "It is more than that, and you know it." After dinner, Grace insisted the older children help with dishes while Preston put the younger ones to bed. She found herself standing at the wash basin with Thomas drying and Elizabeth putting away, and she learned more about the family in those 20 minutes than she had all day. How Thomas worried about his father working too hard. How Elizabeth tried to keep everyone fed but did not really know how to cook. How the twins got into trouble because no one had time to teach them better. How Mary cried for a mother she could not remember. "Your father is doing his best," Grace said quietly. "I know," Thomas replied, "but his best is not enough for everything. That is not his fault. There is just too much for one person." Grace nodded, seeing in this 12-year-old boy the weight of responsibilities no child should carry. "Well, I am here for a month. We will see what we can do to make things easier." That first week established the rhythm that would define their lives. Grace woke before dawn to start breakfast. Real breakfast with eggs and bacon and fresh biscuits that made the children actually excited to get out of bed. She packed lunches for Thomas and Elizabeth to take to the small schoolhouse 5 miles down the road. She kept the twins occupied with age-appropriate chores, teaching them to gather eggs and pull weeds from the kitchen garden that had gone mostly wild. She spent time with Mary, gentle time, reading time, the kind of attention a 3-year-old desperately needed. And she cooked. Lord, how she cooked! Dinners that brought everyone to the table with smiles, desserts on Sundays, bread that actually rose properly. The kitchen became the heart of the house in a way it had not been since Catherine died. Preston found himself watching her more than he should. The way she moved through the kitchen with practiced grace. The way she corrected the twins firmly but kindly. The way she had memorized how each child liked their eggs after just 3 days. He caught himself lingering over morning coffee just to hear her humming while she worked. He came in from the fields earlier than necessary, telling himself it was to check on the children but knowing it was to see her. Grace felt his eyes on her and did not know what to do with the flutter it caused in her chest. She had come here for work, for wages, for a month of stability before moving on to the next job in the next town. She had learned young that attachment was dangerous, that counting on anything permanent only led to heartbreak. Her parents had died when she was 15, leaving her to fend for herself in a world that was not kind to young women alone. She had worked as a cook, a laundress, a seamstress, whatever would keep her fed and housed. She had learned to move on before anyone could disappoint her. But the Ashford family was making it hard to maintain that distance. 2 weeks into her stay, a late spring storm rolled in from the west, all thunder and lightning and rain that turned the desert into temporary rivers. Preston and Thomas were out checking the cattle when it hit, and they came back soaked to the bone and shivering. Grace had hot coffee ready and dry clothes warming by the stove, and she shooed them both off to change while she heated water for baths. "You are going to catch your death," she scolded Preston when he came back down in dry clothes, his hair still dripping. "The cattle do not care if it is raining," he said, accepting the coffee she pressed into his hands. "The cattle will survive one storm. Your children need their father alive." Something in her voice made him look at her more closely. "You sound like you speak from experience." Grace turned back to the stove, stirring soup that did not need stirring. "My father went out in a storm to secure the animals. He caught pneumonia and was dead within a week. My mother followed him 2 months later from grief, or so the doctors said. I think her heart just gave up." Preston set down his coffee and crossed the kitchen until he was standing beside her. "I am sorry. You were young, 15. And you have been alone since then." "I have been surviving since then. There is a difference." He wanted to reach out to touch her shoulder to offer some comfort, but he did not know if that was appropriate or welcome. "You should not have had to survive alone. That is not right. Right or not, it is what happened." She finally looked at him, and he saw in her eyes the walls she had built, the armor that had kept her safe. "The world is not fair, Mr. Ashford. We both know that." "Preston," he said. "Please call me Preston. And you are right, the world is not fair. But that does not mean we cannot try to be kind to each other when we can." The storm lasted 2 days, trapping them all inside, and Grace saw a different side of the family. Preston played checkers with the twins and read stories to Mary. Thomas helped her with the mending, his stitches careful and even. Elizabeth taught her a song her mother used to sing. In the close quarters, forced together by the weather, something shifted. Grace felt the walls she had built starting to crack, and it terrified her. On the 3rd day, the sun returned, and Preston took advantage of the clear weather to ride into Deeming for supplies. He asked Grace what she needed for the kitchen, and she gave him a list written in neat, careful handwriting. He found himself holding onto that piece of paper in his pocket while he conducted his business in town, touching it like a talisman. At the general store, Martha Henderson, who had known Preston since he first came to Deeming with Catherine, gave him a knowing look while she filled his order. "I hear you hired a cook," Martha said, measuring out flour. "News travels fast." "It is a small town, Preston, and people talk. They say she is young and pretty." Preston felt his neck heat. "She is a good cook and good with the children. That is what matters." Hum. Martha wrapped the flour in brown paper. "Catherine has been gone 3 years. No one would blame you for moving on." "I am not moving on. I hired help for a month, if you say so." But her smile said she did not believe him. Preston left town feeling unsettled, Martha's words echoing in his head. He had not thought about another woman since Catherine died. Had not wanted to, had not felt ready. But Grace was different. Grace was in his house, with his children, filling spaces he had not even realized were empty. And more troubling, he found himself wanting her to stay beyond the month they had agreed upon. When he got back to the ranch, he found Grace in the garden with Mary, the little girl's hands covered in dirt as Grace showed her how to plant seeds. The sight of it hit him square in the chest, and he had to take a moment to collect himself before joining them. "Got everything on your list," he said, his voice rougher than intended. Grace looked up, shading her eyes against the sun. "Thank you. Mary has been helping me plan the garden." "I planted carrots," Mary announced proudly. "Did you now?" "Well, we will have to make sure we water them every day so they grow big and strong." Preston crouched down beside his daughter, and his arm brushed against Grace's. The contact sent awareness through both of them, and they pulled apart quickly, awkwardly. That night, after the children were in bed, Preston found Grace on the porch, looking out at the stars scattered across the dark sky like spilled sugar. "Could not sleep?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. "Too quiet," she said. "I am used to boarding houses with thin walls. Here the silence is loud, if that makes sense." "It does." He stretched out his legs, feeling the day's work in his bones. "Grace, I want to ask you something, but I do not want you to feel pressured." She turned to look at him, guarded. "What is it? The month is half over. And I know we agreed on 1 month, and I will pay you what I promised, but the children have taken to you. The house is running smoother than it has in years, and He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I would like to ask if you would consider staying longer. Another month, maybe 2. I would pay you more, of course." Grace was quiet for a long moment, and Preston's heart sank, thinking she would refuse. "Why?" she finally asked. "Because you are good at this. Because the children need you. Because—" He trailed off, not ready to say the rest. "Because what?" "Because I do not want you to leave." The honesty in his voice undid something in Grace. She had spent 11 years building walls, and here was this man with his sad eyes and his 5 children and his decent heart, threatening to tear them all down. "I do not stay places, Preston. I move on. That is what I do." "Why?" "Because staying means caring. Caring means hurting when it ends, and it always ends." Preston leaned forward, elbows on his knees, looking at her intently. "What if it did not have to end? What if you let yourself stay? You are offering me a job, not a life. What if I am offering both?" The words hung between them, charged with possibility and fear. Grace stood abruptly, wrapping her arms around herself. "I should go to bed. Morning comes early." Preston did not try to stop her, but he watched her go, and he knew that something had changed between them. Some line had been crossed that could not be uncrossed. The next week was complicated. Grace threw herself into work, keeping busy enough that she did not have to think about Preston's words or the way her heart had responded to them. Preston gave her space, but could not stop watching her, could not stop wanting to continue that conversation. The children sensed the tension without understanding it. Elizabeth asked Grace if she had done something wrong. Thomas asked his father why he was moping. The twins were oblivious, but Mary, sensitive as 3-year-olds could be, started clinging to Grace's skirts more tightly. It came to a head on a Saturday afternoon when Preston was working with a new horse in the corral and Grace brought him water. The horse was skittish, fighting the bit, and Preston was patient but firm, speaking in low, soothing tones. Grace watched him work, seeing the strength in his hands, the gentleness in his approach, and something in her chest tightened. "You are good with him," she said when he took a break, accepting the water gratefully. "Patience and consistency. That is all it takes. With horses, maybe." He looked at her over the rim of the tin cup. "With most things, I have found, you have to show up day after day, prove you are not going anywhere. Eventually, trust follows. And if you cannot promise you are not going anywhere," Preston set down the cup and faced her fully. "Grace, I need to say something, and I need you to hear me out before you run off like you have been doing all week." She stiffened but did not leave. "I know you have been hurt. I know you have learned not to trust, not to stay. But I also know that you are miserable living that way, even if you will not admit it." He took a breath. "These past 3 weeks, watching you with my children, seeing you bring life back into this house, I have felt something I did not think I would feel again. Catherine was my wife, and I loved her, and I will always love her. But she is gone, and I am still here, and so are my children. We all deserve a chance at happiness again. Preston, let me finish. I am not asking you to replace Catherine. I am not asking you to be something you are not. I am asking you to consider that maybe, just maybe, you have been running from the thing you actually want. A home, a family, a place where you matter. Grace felt tears burning her eyes and she blinked them back furiously. You do not know what you are asking. Then tell me, explain it to me. What happens when you realize I am not enough? When the children get tired of me? When you meet someone better suited to be a rancher's wife? I leave. That is what happens, and it will hurt 1,000 times worse than if I left now. Preston reached out and took her hand, and she let him. What happens when you realize we already love you? That the children ask me every day if you are going to stay. That I lie awake at night hoping you will give us a chance. You talk about hurt like it is inevitable, but Grace, you are hurting right now. You are hurting yourself by not letting yourself be happy. I do not know how to do this, she whispered. Neither do I. I have not courted anyone since Catherine, and I am out of practice. But we can figure it out together if you are willing to try. Grace looked down at their joined hands, his rough with calluses and hers red from work, and she felt the walls crumbling. I am scared. I know, so am I. The month is almost up. Then stay another, just one more month, see how you feel. She looked up at him, at his earnest face and his hopeful eyes, and she felt herself surrendering to something she had fought against for so long. One more month. But Preston, if I stay, if we do this, you have to understand that I am not Catherine. I will not be her. I do not want you to be her. I want you to be you. She squeezed his hand once, then let go, stepping back. I should check on dinner. Grace, she turned back. Thank you for giving us a chance. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and walked back to the house feeling like she had just jumped off a cliff and did not know yet if she would fly or fall. The next month was different. Preston courted her, old-fashioned and proper, even though she lived under his roof. He brought her wildflowers from the range. He sat with her on the porch after the children were in bed, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his childhood in Missouri, how he had come west looking for opportunity. She told him about her parents, about the years of drifting, about the loneliness she had carried like a stone in her chest. The children watched the growing relationship with varying degrees of understanding. Thomas, old enough to remember his mother clearly, had a long talk with his father about whether it was okay to like Grace, to want her to stay. Preston assured him that Catherine would want them all to be happy, that loving someone new did not mean forgetting someone gone. Elizabeth took to Grace like a flower to sun, soaking up the maternal attention she had been starved for. She asked Grace to teach her to cook, to sew, to braid hair in complicated patterns. Grace found herself enjoying the role of teacher, of mentor, of something like a mother. The twins accepted Grace as a permanent fixture with the easy adaptability of 7-year-olds. She was there. She fed them good food and did not yell as much as their father, and that was good enough for them. Mary, who had never known a mother, simply loved Grace with the uncomplicated devotion of a small child. She followed Grace everywhere, helped with every chore, crawled into her lap for stories. Grace, who had never thought about children of her own, found her heart expanding to accommodate this tiny person who had decided she belonged to her. 8 weeks after Grace had arrived, Preston took her into Deeming on a Saturday. They left the children with Thomas in charge, and it was the first time they had been alone together away from the ranch. They had lunch at the hotel restaurant, and Grace felt self-conscious in her best dress, aware of the looks they were getting from other diners. "People are staring," she murmured. "Let them. I am having lunch with the prettiest woman in Deeming. Preston Ashford, you are a flatterer. I am an honest man." After lunch, he took her to the general store, and Martha Henderson gave Grace an appraising look that was not unkind. "So you are the one who has gotten Preston smiling again," Martha said. Grace felt herself flush. "I am just the cook. "Honey, you have not been just the cook for weeks, and everyone knows it." Martha leaned over the counter conspiratorially. "It is good to see. Preston is a good man, and those children need a mother. Catherine would approve, I think." The words stayed with Grace as they drove back to the ranch. "Did you know Martha would say that?" she asked. "Martha has no filter, but she means well. She said Catherine would approve." "Do you think that is true?" Preston was quiet for a moment, guiding the horses along the familiar road. "Catherine wanted me to be happy. When she knew she was dying after Mary was born, she made me promise I would not close myself off, that I would give the children a full life. I think she would like you. You are strong in ways she was not, practical where she was whimsical, but you have a good heart, Grace. That is what would matter to her. I do not want to be a replacement. You are not. You are something new, something different. Something that is ours, not a shadow of the past." Grace reached over and took his hand, and they drove the rest of the way home in comfortable silence. That evening, after the children were in bed, Preston led Grace out beyond the barn to a spot where the view opened up to miles of desert and sky. The stars were brilliant and the air had cooled to something pleasant. "I have been thinking," Preston said, still holding her hand, "about us, about the future." Grace's heart started pounding. "Have you, Grace Sullivan? I know we have only known each other 2 months. I know that is not long by most standards. But I also know what I feel, and I know what my children feel. We love you, all of us, in our own ways. And I do not want to wait months or years to ask you something I already know the answer to in my heart." He turned to face her, taking both of her hands in his. "I am not a man of fancy words. I am a rancher with 5 children and a house that is always messy and a life that is hard work more often than not. But I promise you, if you say yes, I will spend every day trying to make you happy. I will respect you and listen to you and stand beside you in whatever comes. You will never be alone again, Grace. Never." Grace could barely breathe. "Preston, what are you asking me?" "I am asking you to marry me. To stay, not for another month, but forever. To be my wife and a mother to my children and a partner in this life we are building. I know it is fast, and I know it is scary, but Grace, when something is right, you know it. And this is right." Tears were streaming down Grace's face now, and she did not bother to hide them. Every instinct she had told her to run, to protect herself, to keep moving before she could get hurt. But underneath the fear was something stronger, hope. The hope that maybe, just maybe, she had finally found the place she was meant to be. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Preston, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was precious, like she was everything. She buried her face in his chest and let herself cry, releasing years of loneliness and fear and isolation. When she finally pulled back, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gentle and reverent, a promise of all the kisses to come. They told the children the next morning at breakfast. Thomas looked relieved. Elizabeth cried happy tears. The twins cheered. Mary asked if this meant Grace was her mother now, and when Grace said yes, the little girl climbed into her lap and hugged her so tight Grace thought her heart might burst. They were married 3 weeks later in Deeming, at the small church on the edge of town. Grace wore a simple blue dress that Elizabeth had helped her pick out, and Preston wore his Sunday best. All 5 children stood with them, and Martha Henderson cried into her handkerchief. The ceremony was short and sweet, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Preston kissed her in front of God and everyone, and Grace felt like she had finally come home. The first months of marriage were an adjustment. Grace moved her belongings from the guest room into Preston's room, and they learned to share space, to navigate intimacy, to build a life together. There were awkward moments and growing pains, but there was also laughter and warmth and a sense of rightness that sustained them through the rough patches. Grace officially adopted the role of mother to the 5 children, though she did not try to force it. She let each child come to her in their own time, in their own way. Thomas started calling her Grace Mother, a compromise that acknowledged both her place and Catherine's memory. Elizabeth started calling her Ma within a month. The twins called her whatever came to mind, sometimes Grace, sometimes Mother, sometimes Hey You when they were being rascals. Mary called her Mama and crawled into bed with Preston and Grace most mornings, snuggling between them like she belonged there, because she did. Preston was attentive and affectionate, making sure Grace never doubted his feelings. He told her he loved her every day, sometimes multiple times. He helped with the housework when he could, not wanting her to feel like just a cook and housekeeper. He courted her even though they were married, bringing her small gifts, stealing kisses in the kitchen, holding her close at night and whispering his gratitude that she had stayed. Grace bloomed under the attention and the security. The hard edges she had carried for so long softened. She laughed more easily. She sang while she worked. She started planning for a future instead of just surviving the present. She planted a garden that would take years to mature, ordered fabric for curtains she would hang in the spring, talked with Preston about maybe expanding the house, building onto it as their family grew. Because 5 months after the wedding, Grace realized she was pregnant. She told Preston on a cool November evening, sitting on the porch wrapped in a blanket against the desert chill. He had his arm around her and she leaned into his warmth, gathering her courage. "Preston, I need to tell you something. That sounds serious. It is good, I think. At least, I hope you will think it is good." He turned to look at her, concerned. "Grace, what is it?" "I am with child. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Preston just stared at her and Grace's heart started to sink. Maybe he did not want more children. Maybe 5 was enough. Maybe she should have talked to him first before getting pregnant, though she did not know how that conversation would have gone. Then his face split into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he pulled her into his arms, laughing with pure joy. "A baby. Grace, we are having a baby." He pulled back to look at her, his hands on her shoulders. "Are you happy about this? Is this what you want?" "I am terrified," she admitted. "But yes, I am happy. I never thought I would have children of my own, and I know we already have 5, but this one is ours, together. Something we made." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Thank you. Thank you for staying, for taking a chance on us, for giving me this." They told the children the next day, and the reactions ranged from Thomas's mature congratulations to the twins wanting to know if it would be a boy or girl to Mary's confusion about where babies came from. Elizabeth was thrilled at the thought of a new baby to help care for, and Grace had to gently remind her that she would still need to focus on school and her own childhood. The pregnancy was not easy. Grace was sick the first few months, and Preston hovered like a worried hen, bringing her ginger tea and crackers, insisting she rest. The children tried to be helpful, taking on extra chores so Grace would not overwork herself. Martha Henderson came by to check on her, bringing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes from various deeming families. As winter turned to spring, Grace grew round with the baby. Preston was fascinated by the changes in her body, placing his hands on her belly to feel the baby kick, talking to their child in soft tones. The children liked to feel the baby move too, arguing over whether it was a brother or sister. Grace found herself thinking about her parents, wishing they could have met Preston, could have seen her happy and settled. She told the baby about them on quiet afternoons, rocking in the chair Preston had made for her, promising this child would know where it came from, would understand the legacy of love and loss that had brought Grace to this moment. In late May of 1879, Grace went into labor on a bright Tuesday morning. Preston sent Thomas racing into town for the doctor while he stayed with Grace, holding her hand, coaching her through the contractions. Elizabeth kept the younger children occupied downstairs, trying to distract them from the sounds of their stepmother laboring. The birth was long and difficult, and Preston remembered Catherine, remembered losing her this way, and he was terrified. But Grace was strong, stronger than he had given her credit for, and when the doctor finally placed a squalling infant in her arms, she was exhausted but alive and smiling. "A boy," the doctor announced. "Healthy lungs on him, too." Preston looked at his son, at his wife, and felt his eyes fill with tears. "Grace, you did it. You are amazing." She was too tired to do more than smile, but she held the baby close, counting fingers and toes, marveling at the tiny person they had created. They named him Daniel Preston Ashford, and his older siblings doted on him from the start. Thomas held him with careful reverence. Elizabeth was a natural helper, changing diapers and rocking him when he fussed. The twins were loud and over-enthusiastic, but they meant well. Mary was gentle and curious, touching his tiny hands with wonder. Grace settled into motherhood with the same practical competence she brought to everything else. She nursed Daniel and managed the house and kept track of 5 other children, and somehow made it all look easier than it was. Preston made sure to tell her regularly how incredible she was, because he knew she needed to hear it, needed the reassurance that she was doing well. Daniel was 6 months old when Grace realized she was pregnant again. She laughed when she told Preston, a slightly hysterical edge to it. "Already. We just had a baby." Preston pulled her close, rubbing her back. "Are you upset?" "No, surprised, overwhelmed, but not upset." She looked up at him. 2 babies in 2 years, on top of 5 others. We are going to need a bigger house. Then we will build a bigger house, and they did. Over the next year, with help from neighbors and hired workers, they added 4 more rooms to the house, expanding it to accommodate their growing family. Grace gave birth to a daughter, Catherine Grace Ashford, in the spring of 1880, naming her after Preston's first wife with his tearful blessing. Life was chaos and noise and love. The older children were growing. Thomas, now 15 and already helping run the ranch, Elizabeth 12 and blossoming into a young woman, the twins nearly 10 and finally starting to settle down. Mary was 6 and in school, and baby Catherine was crawling everywhere, determined to keep up with her brother Daniel. Grace could barely remember the woman she had been 3 years ago, alone and drifting, convinced that staying anywhere was too dangerous. She had been so afraid of being hurt that she had hurt herself by refusing to live. Now, surrounded by noise and mess and more love than she knew what to do with, she could not imagine any other life. On their 3rd wedding anniversary, Preston surprised her with a day away from the ranch. Thomas and Elizabeth agreed to watch the younger children, and Preston drove Grace back to the spot outside Deeming where he had proposed. "You remember this place?" he asked. "How could I forget? This is where my life changed. Mine, too." He took her hand, threading their fingers together. "Grace, I know these 3 years have not been easy. 7 children is a lot, and 2 of them are still babies. You work harder than anyone I have ever known, and sometimes I worry we do not appreciate you enough. Preston, I have never felt unappreciated. Overwhelmed sometimes, exhausted often, but never unappreciated. Still, I want you to know, what you have given me, given all of us, it is everything. You came here to cook for a month, and you gave us a lifetime. You gave me love when I thought I would never feel it again. You gave my children a mother when they desperately needed one. You gave me 2 more children I treasure with all my heart. You made our house a home, Grace, and I love you more with every day that passes." Grace felt tears welling up, the happy kind. "I love you too. And Preston, I want you to know that staying was the bravest thing I ever did. Walking off that stage 3 years ago was easy compared to deciding to trust you, to trust this. But it was the best decision I ever made. You and those children, you are my whole world. I would not trade this life for anything." He kissed her then, long and deep and full of promise, and when they finally pulled apart, they sat together watching the sun set over the New Mexico desert. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful. The years that followed were full and rich. Thomas grew into a fine young man and eventually took over more of the ranch operations, allowing Preston to spend more time with the younger children. Elizabeth met a nice boy from town and married at 19, giving Grace and Preston their first grandchild a year later. The twins went their separate ways, Samuel becoming a blacksmith in Deeming and Sarah marrying a farmer from a neighboring ranch. Mary grew into a lovely young woman who wanted to be a teacher. Daniel and Catherine grew up knowing nothing but a full house and loving parents. They had vague awareness that their mother had not always been there, that once their father had been married to someone else, but to them, Grace was mother, pure and simple. Grace and Preston continued to add to their family, welcoming 2 more children over the years, a daughter named Anna, and finally, when Grace was 36 and thought they were surely done, a surprise son they named James. 9 children in total, a full, chaotic, beautiful mess of a family. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Preston organized a party at the ranch. All the children came, even those who had moved away, bringing spouses and children of their own. The house was bursting with people and noise and laughter. Grace stood on the porch watching it all, feeling the weight of her 53 years, but also the lightness of a life well lived. Preston came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy anniversary, wife. Happy anniversary, husband." "Any regrets?" Grace turned in his arms to face him, this man who had convinced her to stay, who had loved her through fear and doubt and into something strong and real. "Not a single one. You asked me for a month and I gave you a lifetime, and I would do it again in a heartbeat." He kissed her, surrounded by the noise of their enormous family, and Grace thought about that frightened woman who had stepped off the stage in Deeming 20 years ago. She had been so alone, so certain that staying anywhere would only lead to pain. But Preston and his 5 children had taught her that love was worth the risk. That home was not a place but people. That family was something you built together, day by day, meal by meal, moment by moment. She had come to cook for a month. She had stayed for a lifetime. And it had been the best choice she had ever made. The house behind them was full of children and grandchildren, the future stretching out bright and promising. The ranch had prospered under their combined efforts, the land rich and productive. Preston's hair had gone silver, and Grace had lines around her eyes from squinting into the desert sun and laughing at her children's antics. As the sun set over New Mexico, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Grace and Preston stood together on the porch of the home they had built, surrounded by the family they had created, and knew with certainty that they had gotten it right. Love was not easy, but it was worth it. Staying was not safe, but it was where the real living happened. And sometimes, the best things in life came from taking a chance on a cowboy with 5 kids and no wife, from stepping off a stage into uncertainty and finding, at the end of it all, exactly where you were meant to be all along.